When little Matteo called his nanny Mama in front of 50 millionaire guests, no one imagined that moment would forever change the lives of thousands of abandoned children. But what happened next exposed a truth so powerful, it sparked a movement that would reach every corner of the globe. This is not just a story about wealth and poverty. This is about the invisible bonds that shape our world, and how one woman's quiet love became a revolution that no amount of money could buy. The morning sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Castellanos estate, casting golden rays across marble floors that had never known the sound of children's laughter. Everything in this architectural masterpiece screamed perfection. From the imported Italian chandeliers worth more than most people's homes, to the manicured gardens that stretched beyond the horizon like a green ocean of privilege. But for all its grandeur, the mansion felt hollow, like a museum where love had been carefully curated out of existence. The estate sat on 12 acres of prime real estate in Malibu's most exclusive enclave, where the average home price exceeded $20 million and privacy was purchased by the acre. Security cameras monitored every entrance, motion sensors tracked every movement, and a staff of 15 maintained the illusion of effortless perfection. Yet in this fortress of wealth, the most valuable thing couldn't be bought, sold, or insured. In the heart of this cold palace, a different kind of warmth radiated from a small nursery painted in soft pastels. Here, Maria Elena Vasquez moved with the gentle grace of someone who understood that true wealth couldn't be measured in dollars. Her weathered hands, marked by years of selfless service and sacrifice, carefully buttoned a tiny shirt on the squirming 5-year-old before her. At 52, Maria Elena carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had survived storms that would have broken lesser souls. Her dark hair, streaked with premature silver, was always pulled back in a simple bun. Her clothes were modest, practical, chosen for function over fashion. But her eyes held depths of love that no amount of money could purchase. "Hold still, mi amor," she whispered in accented English, her voice carrying the melody of countless lullabies sung in the darkness when nightmares came calling. Matteo giggled, his dark eyes sparkling with mischief that reminded Maria Elena of another little boy in another time, in another life. "I'm not a baby anymore, Mama Maria," he declared with the fierce independence that only 5-year-olds possess, but leaned into her touch anyway, craving the affection like sunlight after rain. Maria Elena smiled, her heart both breaking and healing in the same moment. She had heard that defiant tone for nearly 4 years, ever since he was barely walking and afraid of thunderstorms. She had been the one who rocked him through sleepless nights when teething made him cry for hours. She had stayed by his bedside during fevers, monitoring his temperature every 30 minutes, praying in Spanish and English and every language her heart knew. She had taught him his first words in both languages, celebrated when he took his first steps, and held him when he scraped his knees learning to ride his bicycle. She had shown him how to tie his shoes with patient repetition, how to say his prayers with reverence, and how to calm his racing heart when nightmares made the darkness seem alive with monsters. But she wasn't family, not in the eyes of the woman who signed her modest paychecks. Isabella Castellanos descended the grand staircase at exactly 8 a.m. each morning, her designer heels clicking against the marble like a metronome of privilege. At 38, she was tall, elegant, and impeccably maintained, the product of personal trainers, nutritionists, stylists, and cosmetic procedures that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Her platinum blonde hair never had a strand out of place, styled twice weekly by a celebrity hairdresser who flew in from Beverly Hills. Her makeup was applied each morning by a professional who arrived at dawn, and her wardrobe was curated by a personal stylist who charged $5,000 per consultation. Isabella was the type of woman who believed perfection was her birthright, that beauty was a currency, and that image was everything. She had married Charles Castellanos not for love, though she told herself it was, but for the lifestyle his tech fortune could provide. Their marriage was a business arrangement disguised as romance, a merger of ambitions rather than hearts. She entered the nursery with the efficiency of a CEO entering a boardroom, her presence immediately changing the atmosphere from warm to clinical. Her eyes briefly scanned Mateo, already dressed and ready for another day of being the perfect accessory to her perfect life. But they didn't linger. There was no warmth in her gaze, no maternal instinct that made her want to scoop him up and cover him with kisses. "Maria Elena," she said without greeting, her voice crisp and businesslike, each word precisely enunciated as if she were dictating a memo. "Please ensure he doesn't spill anything before the guests arrive this afternoon. And I'd prefer if you wore the Navy uniform today. Something understated." The word understated carried weight, a reminder of place and position, a subtle reinforcement of the hierarchy that governed this house like an unwritten constitution. "Sí, señora," Maria Elena replied quietly, her voice steady despite the familiar sting of being reduced to furniture in her own story. Isabella turned on her heel without another word, leaving behind the faint scent of expensive perfume and emotional distance. Her heels clicked away down the marble hallway, each step echoing like a countdown to something inevitable. To the Castellanos family, Maria Elena was staff, efficient, quiet, replaceable. A line item in their monthly budget, a service provider who happened to live in their house. But to Mateo, she was the sun around which his small world revolved, the gravitational force that kept his universe stable and safe. As Isabella's footsteps faded down the hallway, Mateo looked up at Maria Elena with eyes that held more wisdom than his 5 years should have allowed. Children, she had learned, saw truth with a clarity that adults spent lifetimes trying to recapture. "Why doesn't Mama Isabella hug me like you do, Mama Maria?" he asked, his small voice carrying the weight of a question that had no good answer. The question hit Maria Elena like a physical blow, striking at the heart of everything she couldn't say, couldn't explain, couldn't fix. She knelt down to his level, her hands gently cupping his face, feeling the softness of his skin and the trust in his eyes. "Some people show love differently, mi niño," she whispered, though her heart ached with the inadequacy of the explanation. How could she tell him that some people were afraid of love? That some hearts had been closed so long they forgot how to open? How could she explain that his mother saw him as a reflection of herself rather than a person in his own right? What she couldn't tell him was that every night, when the mansion fell silent and the lights dimmed, she would retreat to her small room beside the service quarters and quietly open the top drawer of her dresser. Inside lay a worn photograph, its edges soft from years of gentle handling. A little boy no older than Mateo, with the same sparkle in his eyes and the same mischievous smile. Diego, her Diego. "Buenas noches, mi angelito," she would whisper to the photograph, her voice barely audible over the hum of the laundry machines down the hall. Her fingertips would trace the faded image like a prayer, remembering the son she had lost to poverty, to a healthcare system that moved too slowly for a mother's desperate love, to a world that valued some lives more than others. She wasn't just caring for someone else's child. She was pouring all the love she never got to finish giving into this little boy who called her mama when no one was listening. Every lullaby was for Diego. Every bedtime story was for Diego. Every scraped knee, kissed and bandaged, was for the child she couldn't save, and the child she could still protect. The morning of the charity gala arrived with the kind of orchestrated chaos that only unlimited money could buy. The Castellanos estate transformed into a showcase of high society excess. Crystal glasses caught the afternoon light like diamonds scattered across white tablecloths. Imported roses were arranged in formations that would make military generals proud, and a string quartet played melodies that floated through the air like expensive perfume. Isabella moved through the preparations like a conductor before a grand symphony. Her smile perfectly calibrated to charm, while her eyes remained calculating. This wasn't just a party, it was a performance, a carefully choreographed display of wealth and influence, designed to cement her position in the social hierarchy that governed their world. The guest list read like a who's who of California's elite. Tech moguls whose companies shaped global communication, entertainment executives who decided what the world would watch, real estate developers who transformed coastlines into code playgrounds for the wealthy, and philanthropists whose charitable giving was as much about tax benefits as genuine altruism. Each invitation had been hand calligraphed on paper that cost more per sheet than most people spent on lunch. The menu had been designed by a Michelin-starred chef who normally cooked for heads of state. The flowers had been flown in from Ecuador that morning, their carbon footprint a small price to pay for perfection. "Maria Elena," Isabella called out, not bothering to look up from her event checklist, which had been organized with the precision of a military operation. "You'll be present during the party, but only if needed. Please wear the Navy uniform, the simple one, nothing that draws attention." The instruction was clear: be invisible, be available, be silent. Exist in the spaces between conversations. In the shadows between spotlights, in the margins of other people's stories. "Sí, señora," Maria Elena replied, her tone even. She had learned long ago that in homes like this, invisibility was survival, that the safest place for people like her was in the background of other people's photographs. The uniform hung in her closet like a shadow, high-collared, shapeless, the color of storm clouds. As she pressed it carefully, Maria Elena couldn't help but think how something could fit so perfectly and still make you feel like you didn't exist. The fabric was quality, the cut professional, but it was designed to erase rather than enhance, to diminish rather than dignify. Downstairs, Mateo was having none of the boundaries Isabella tried so desperately to maintain. At 5 years old, he possessed the radical honesty that adults spent lifetimes trying to suppress, the dangerous authenticity that threatened carefully constructed facades. "Mama Maria," he squealed, bursting into the kitchen with chocolate smeared across his face and a crayon clutched in his small fist. He crashed into Maria Elena's legs with the full force of his joy, looking up at her with eyes that held no pretense, no calculation, no awareness of the social rules he was breaking simply by loving openly. Isabella appeared moments later, her heels announcing her arrival like warning shots fired across a battlefield. She didn't smile. Smiling would create wrinkles, and wrinkles were evidence of imperfection. "Mateo," she said sharply, her voice cutting through the kitchen's warmth like a blade through silk. "How many times must I tell you? Maria Elena is not your mother." The little boy looked confused, his head tilting as he tried to understand why the woman who kissed his scraped knees and sang him to sleep couldn't be called Mama. In his 5-year-old logic, Mama was the person who made you feel safe, who knew exactly how to cut your sandwiches and which bedtime story would chase away the monsters. He turned to Maria Elena, who said nothing, her expression carefully neutral, even as her hand rested gently on his back, rubbing small circles only he could feel, a secret language of comfort that needed no words. "I'm sorry, Mama Maria," he whispered, his voice small and uncertain, already learning that love had rules he didn't understand. Isabella's jaw tightened like a wire being stretched to its breaking point. Enough of that nonsense. Later that afternoon, as Maria Elena prepared Matteo's lunch in the kitchen, a sandwich cut into triangles just the way he liked. With the crusts removed and strawberries cut into heart shapes because she knew they made him smile. The head chef leaned over and spoke in hushed tones. Carlos had worked for wealthy families for 20 years, had seen the best and worst of how money could shape human behavior. He was a man of few words, but his eyes missed nothing. Sometimes, he muttered, glancing toward the hallway, where Isabella's voice could be heard directing the florists with military precision. I wonder who really belongs in this house. Maria Elena didn't respond, but the comment lingered in her mind long after the dishes were clean and the child was napping. It was a dangerous thought, the kind that could unravel carefully maintained illusions, the kind that asked questions no one wanted answered. That evening, when the estate settled into its usual artificial quiet, she retreated to her room and sat on the edge of her narrow bed, still wearing the navy uniform that clung to her like a reminder of her place in this world. She opened the top drawer and pulled out the photograph, its surface soft from years of loving touches. Diego smiled up at her, round cheeks, bright eyes, a joy that had been extinguished far too soon by a fever that turned deadly, by emergency rooms that moved too slowly, by a system that valued some children more than others. You would be almost Matteo's age now, she whispered, her voice barely audible in the silence. He's nothing like you, but he feels like something I lost and found again. She laid the photo back carefully, as if returning a piece of her soul to its resting place. Tomorrow would bring another day of being invisible, another day of loving a child who wasn't hers while carrying the memory of the one who was. But tomorrow would also bring something else, a moment that would change everything, a truth that could no longer be contained, a love that would refuse to stay hidden. Chapter 3. The moment everything changed. By early afternoon, the Castellanos estate had transformed into a portrait of high society excess that would have made Gatsby himself envious. Sunlight danced across white linens that draped every surface like freshly pressed privilege, while silver platters sparkled with canapes that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. Crystal flutes caught the light as guests sipped champagne that had traveled further than most people ever would, each bottle worth more than a month's rent in the real world. The guests arrived in a parade of luxury vehicles, Bentleys, Maseratis, Teslas that cost more than houses. Their drivers whisked away to a separate area where the help waited invisibly for their employer's pleasure. They emerged in designer gowns and tailored suits, their jewelry catching the afternoon sun like tiny spotlights of wealth. Each piece a statement of status, each outfit a declaration of belonging to a world most could only dream of entering. They were tech executives whose decisions affected millions of lives, gallery owners who decided which art would be deemed valuable, philanthropists whose charitable giving was as much about tax benefits as genuine altruism, and socialites whose full-time job was maintaining their position in the hierarchy of wealth and influence. A soft jazz trio played near the fountain, their notes mingling with the clinking of glasses and the hum of conversations that never quite reached genuine warmth. The air was perfumed with imported roses and the unmistakable scent of money, clean, crisp, and somehow hollow. Every detail had been orchestrated to perfection, the lighting designed to flatter aging faces, the temperature controlled to the degree, the acoustics engineered so conversations could flow without strain. Even the timing of the sun's position had been calculated to create the most photogenic backdrop for the social media posts that would follow. Inside the house, Maria Elena moved quietly through the back hallways, smoothing Matteo's collar and brushing crumbs from his cheek. He tugged at the stiff bow tie, his small face scrunched in discomfort that reminded her of every child who had ever been dressed up for adult purposes. "It itches, Mama Maria," he complained, his voice carrying the universal whine of children everywhere who understood instinctively that comfort mattered more than appearance. "I know, mi amor," she said gently, adjusting the tie so it wouldn't rub against his neck. Her fingers worked with the practiced ease of someone who had dressed countless children, who understood that small comforts could make big differences. "Just for a little while, okay? Then we can take it off and you can play." He nodded reluctantly, trusting her in the way that only children can, completely, without reservation, without the cynicism that comes with age and disappointment. In his world, Mama Maria's promises were as reliable as sunrise, as certain as gravity. Once he was presentable according to Isabella's exacting standards, she handed him off to his mother, who appeared at the doorway like a perfectly dressed sentinel. Isabella's smile was camera-ready, her posture magazine-perfect, her entire being calibrated for the performance that was about to begin. Then Maria Elena slipped away toward the kitchen, her navy dress allowing her to blend into the background like she was part of the architecture itself. In this world, people like her were meant to be functional rather than visible, useful rather than acknowledged. From the shadowed edge of the hallway, Maria Elena watched as Matteo joined the crowd. Holding his juice glass with both hands like it contained liquid gold, his eyes scanned the sea of unfamiliar faces, searching for something familiar, something safe in this ocean of strangers who spoke in voices too loud and laughed at jokes he didn't understand. Isabella moved through the crowd with practiced ease, gliding from one guest to another like a swan on still water. Her laugh was perfectly pitched to charm, her anecdotes carefully rehearsed to impress. Her entire performance designed to reinforce her position in the social ecosystem that governed their world. She was performing the role of the perfect hostess, the devoted mother, the charitable socialite who cared deeply about giving back to the community. Every gesture was calculated, every word chosen for maximum impact, every smile deployed with strategic precision. A guest leaned in close, her voice dripping with the kind of admiration that wealthy women traded like currency. "Isabella, your little boy is absolutely precious. So well-behaved, so polite. You must be incredibly proud of the job you've done raising him." Isabella's smile could have powered the entire estate, bright enough to blind and warm enough to melt. "We've worked very hard to raise him properly," she said, her voice full of practiced humility that masked the pride swelling in her chest. "It's all about consistency, high standards, and never accepting anything less than excellence." Not a single glance in Maria Elena's direction. Not a word about the woman who had actually done the raising, who had taught him his manners through patient repetition, who had shown him how to be kind and gentle in a world that often rewarded neither. Not a mention of the countless hours spent reading bedtime stories, the sleepless nights during illnesses, the gentle corrections that shaped character more than any lecture ever could. Maria Elena heard every word from where she stood in the shadows. She didn't react, not visibly, but her hand, holding a serving tray, curled just a little tighter around the silver handle. The irony wasn't lost on her. Isabella was receiving praise for work she had never done, taking credit for love she had never given. The afternoon wore on with the predictable rhythm of high society gatherings. Conversations flowed like expensive wine, touching on topics that mattered to people who had never known want. Art acquisitions, vacation homes, investment strategies, and charitable causes that provided tax benefits as much as social capital. Children were mentioned only in passing, as accessories to successful lives rather than individuals with their own needs and dreams. Nannies were discussed like household appliances, useful when functioning properly, replaceable when they weren't. And then it happened. Matteo, standing beside Isabella as she accepted compliments about his upbringing, from a circle of admiring women, spotted Maria Elena near the doorway. His face lit up like sunrise breaking through storm clouds, like Christmas morning and birthday parties and every good thing a 5-year-old heart could imagine. "Mama?" he shouted suddenly, his voice cutting through the polite chatter like a knife through silk, like truth through pretense, like love through lies. "Mama Maria." The words hung in the air for a moment that seemed to stretch into eternity. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every glass paused halfway to waiting lips. Every head turned in unison toward the small boy whose honesty had just shattered the carefully constructed facade of the afternoon. Before anyone could stop him, before Isabella could intervene, before the social machinery could grind into damage control mode, Matteo dashed through the crowd with the fearless determination that only children possess. He slipped between designer gowns and tailored slacks, past gasps and murmured exclamations, past the shocked faces of people who had never seen such raw, unfiltered emotion in their carefully controlled world. A cookie clutched in one hand, frosting already smeared across his vest like evidence of his humanity. He flung his arms around Maria Elena's waist with the pure, unfiltered love that only children possess before the world teaches them to hide their hearts. The serving tray in her hands tilted slightly, but she caught it with the steady grace of someone who had spent years anticipating the unexpected needs of children, who had learned to be ready for anything while appearing to do nothing. He looked up at her, grinning with chocolate-stained teeth and eyes that held no awareness of the social earthquake he had just triggered. "I saved you a cookie, Mama Maria," he whispered proudly, holding out the half-eaten treat like it was the crown jewels, like it was the most precious gift in the world. Behind them, Isabella's expression froze like a mask that had suddenly cracked under pressure. The smile that had been so carefully maintained throughout the afternoon faltered, then crumbled completely as blood drained from her face. Guests turned, eyes wide with the kind of shock that comes from witnessing something real in a world built on pretense. Wine glasses were forgotten in hands that had suddenly gone numb. Someone chuckled nervously, the sound sharp and uncomfortable in the sudden silence. Another guest pulled out their phone, sensing with the instinct of the social media age that something significant was happening, something that would be shared and reshared until it reached every corner of the internet. Isabella let out a brittle laugh, high and tight as a wire about to snap, the sound carrying just a hint of desperation beneath the forced lightness. "Oh, he gets confused sometimes," she said to the crowd, her voice carrying across the garden like a plea for understanding, for forgiveness, for the return of the comfortable illusions that had just been shattered. "You know how children are," she continued, her words coming faster now, tumbling over each other in her haste to rebuild the walls that Matteo's honesty had just demolished. "Maria Elena is just our nanny. He doesn't understand the difference. Children say the silliest things, don't they?" But Matteo wasn't confused, not at all. In his 5-year-old wisdom, he understood something that all the adults around him had forgotten. Love was simple, truth was clear, and Mama was the person who made you feel safe in a scary world. He didn't let go of Maria Elena. Instead, he nuzzled into her dress, leaving a smear of chocolate across the carefully ironed fabric, marking her with his love like a badge of honor. He didn't care about the crowd or the rules or the social expectations that governed this world of wealth and appearances. All he knew was who made him feel safe, who sang to him when he was scared, who loved him without conditions or expectations, or the need for him to be anything other than exactly who he was. Maria Elena gently bent down to his level, her movements careful and deliberate, despite the dozens of eyes watching her every gesture, despite the phones recording her every word, despite the weight of a moment that would change everything. She brushed his cheek with her thumb, her voice soft with a love that couldn't be bought or sold, couldn't be manufactured or performed, couldn't be anything other than absolutely, completely real. I see you found your sweet tooth again, mi niño, she whispered, her words meant only for him, but somehow carrying to every corner of the suddenly silent garden, somehow reaching into the hearts of everyone present, then reminding them of what they had lost in their pursuit of perfection. The jazz resumed after a moment. Conversation slowly restarted, like engines reluctant to turn over. But the warmth of that embrace and the coldness of Isabella's forced explanation left a tension in the air that no amount of champagne could wash away. In that moment, everyone present had witnessed something real in a world built on pretense, and it made them all deeply, profoundly uncomfortable. Because in Matteo's simple declaration of love, in his innocent honesty, in his refusal to pretend that the woman who raised him wasn't his real mother, they had seen a truth that challenged everything they believed about family, about love, about what really mattered in life. And that truth was about to change everything. Chapter 4. The Speech That Shook the World. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the garden as Isabella prepared for the evening's highlight. Her carefully rehearsed speech about charity, community, and the importance of giving back. She stood near the center of the gathering, a glass of rosé in her manicured hand, her posture perfect as always, her smile calibrated to inspire both admiration and envy. The pianist, sensing his cue with the precision of someone who had performed at countless such events, let the final note fade into expectant silence. Conversations hushed like waves retreating from shore. Champagne flutes were raised in anticipation, and all eyes turned to Isabella as she prepared to deliver the words he had practiced in front of her mirror that morning. This was her moment, the culmination of months of planning, the spotlight she had orchestrated with the precision of a Broadway director. Every detail had been calculated, the lighting that would flatter her features, the backdrop of roses that would photograph beautifully, the timing that would ensure maximum social media impact. Maria Elena stood just outside the frame of attention, near the serving station beneath the pergola, where climbing roses created a natural canopy. She wasn't meant to be part of this moment, only to refill drinks, replace napkins, and disappear back into the shadows where the help belonged. Isabella cleared her throat delicately, her voice carrying the practiced warmth of someone who had given many such speeches, who understood that charity was as much about image as impact, as much about being seen to care as actually caring. To friends old and new, she began. Her chin lifted slightly as she surveyed her audience with calculated grace, her words flowing like honey over the assembled crowd. To family, to beauty, and to the bonds that make us who we. Mama, I want to sit with Mama. The words cut through the evening air like thunder splitting a clear sky, like lightning illuminating a landscape that had been hidden in darkness. Every head turned in unison. Every conversation died mid-sentence. Every glass paused halfway to waiting lips. Standing beside the dessert table, his small voice carrying with the clarity that only children possess when they speak their truth without filter or fear. Matteo pointed directly, unmistakably, undeniably at Maria Elena. The silence that followed was so complete that the fountain's gentle bubbling sounded like a waterfall, that the rustle of leaves in the evening breeze sounded like applause, that the beating of hearts sounded like thunder in the sudden stillness. A woman gasped audibly, her hand flying to her throat as if the words had physically struck her. A man spilled champagne down his shirt, forgetting to lower his glass as his mouth fell open in shock. Whispers spread like wildfire through dry grass, like rumors through a small town, like truth through a world built on lies. Did he just say, "Is that the nanny he's pointing to? Oh my God, someone's recording this. This is going to be everywhere." Maria Elena froze, her heart hammering against her ribs, like a caged bird desperate for freedom, like truth demanding to be heard, like love refusing to stay hidden any longer. Isabella's smile twitched, faltered, then cracked completely as blood drained from her face like water from a broken dam. She forced another laugh, this one even more brittle than before, as if trying to sweep the moment under an expensive Persian rug, as if laughter could somehow undo what had just been witnessed by 50 of the most influential people in California. "He's just confused," she said, turning to the circle of stunned guests with desperation creeping into her voice like cracks in a perfect facade. "You know how children are. They say the most unexpected things. Maria Elena is the nanny, that's all. He doesn't understand the difference between..." But Mateo wasn't confused. Not at all. In his 5-year-old wisdom, he understood something that all the adults around him had forgotten in their pursuit of wealth and status and social standing. He walked right past Isabella, right through the sea of pearls and designer suits, past the shocked faces and raised phones, past the whispered comments and nervous laughter. He moved with the fearless determination of someone who knew exactly what he wanted, exactly where he belonged, exactly who his real family was. He took Maria Elena's hand in both of his small ones, his touch gentle but firm, his eyes looking up at her with absolute trust and unconditional love. "You're my real mama, right?" he said, his voice carrying the absolute certainty that only children possess before the world teaches them to doubt their own hearts, before society tells them that love has rules and boundaries and conditions. "You love me more than anyone," he continued, his words falling into the silence like stones into still water, creating ripples that would spread far beyond this garden, far beyond this moment, far beyond anything anyone present could imagine. The silence that followed was so complete that time seemed to stop, that the earth seemed to pause in its rotation, that the universe seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what would come next. Maria Elena's eyes filled with tears she had been holding back for years. Tears that carried the weight of every goodbye she'd never been allowed to say, every child she'd loved and lost, every moment of joy stolen by circumstances beyond her control. Her voice, when it came, was thick with emotion, but steady with truth, soft with love, but strong with conviction. "Sweetheart," she whispered, her words barely audible, but somehow reaching every corner of the garden, somehow penetrating the hearts of everyone present. "I love you more than all the stars in the sky, more than all the fish in the sea, more than anything in this whole wide world." Isabella stepped forward, her mask of composure finally shattering into sharp-edged fury that had been building for months, for years, for every moment she had felt inadequate compared to the woman who actually raised her son. Her voice, though low, carried enough venom to silence even the evening breeze, enough ice to freeze the roses in their beds. "Maria Elena," she snapped, each word a dagger thrown with precision, each syllable dripping with the kind of rage that comes from having one's carefully constructed world exposed as a lie. "Return to the kitchen immediately. This is completely inappropriate." The word inappropriate hung in the air like an accusation, like a judgment passed down from on high, like a declaration that love itself could be wrong if it didn't follow the proper channels, if it didn't respect the proper hierarchies, if it didn't know its proper place. But Maria Elena didn't move, not right away. She stayed there on one knee, holding the little boy who had spoken the one truth no one in the garden wanted to acknowledge. The truth that love couldn't be bought or sold or controlled, that family wasn't always about blood, that sometimes the people who matter most are the ones society tells us matter least. Mateo clung to her, burying his face in her shoulder, and for one suspended moment that seemed to last forever, all the designer gowns, all the crystal glasses, all the carefully curated perfection meant absolutely nothing. There was only the boy, the woman who loved him, and a truth that could no longer be contained, no longer be hidden, no longer be denied. Several guests had their phones out now, recording everything with the instinct of people who understood that they were witnessing something significant, something that would be shared and reshared until it reached every corner of the internet, until it became part of the global conversation about love and family and what really matters in life. The video would be uploaded within minutes, shared across social media platforms faster than wildfire, viewed by millions before the sun set on this perfect California day. But in that moment, none of that mattered. What mattered was love, real, unconditional, transformative love, standing in defiance of a world that had tried to make it invisible, that had tried to reduce it to a line item in a budget, that had tried to pretend it didn't exist. As Maria Elena finally rose and gently guided Mateo toward the house, she could feel the weight of every stare, every whispered comment, every judgment being passed by people who had never known what it meant to love without condition, to give without expectation, to sacrifice without recognition. But she could also feel something else, the beginning of a change that would ripple far beyond the walls of this mansion, far beyond the borders of this exclusive community, far beyond anything anyone present could imagine. The truth had been spoken by the most honest voice in the room, and no amount of money or social standing could take it back. Chapter 5: The Reckoning. The morning after the garden party arrived wrapped in uncomfortable silence, the kind that settles after a storm when everything looks intact, but something fundamental has shifted beneath the surface. The mansion felt different. The marble floors seemed colder. The crystal chandeliers seemed dimmer. The very air seemed to vibrate with tension that no amount of money could dispel. Isabella sat in the sunroom, swirling tea she had no intention of drinking, her expression unreadable, but the tightness in her jaw betraying the fury that had kept her awake all night. Dark circles under her eyes, carefully concealed with expensive concealer, told the story of hours spent pacing, planning, trying to control damage that seemed to spread like wildfire across every social media platform. She had spent the night on her phone, calling friends, texting influencers, laughing off the incident as childish confusion to anyone who would listen. But the video was everywhere: Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, shared by millions, commented on by thousands, dissected by strangers who had never heard of the Castellanos family, but now felt qualified to judge their entire lives. The hashtags were already trending. Hashtag Real Mama, Nanny Love, hashtag Truth from Children, hashtag Who is Your Real Family. The video had been viewed over 10 million times in 12 hours, shared by celebrities, commented on by child psychologists, analyzed by social media experts who declared it the most authentic moment of the year. But inside the mansion, the humiliation burned like acid. That woman, that employee, had crossed a line in front of her guests, in front of people who mattered, people who could make or break social standing with a single whispered conversation at the country club. Charles arrived mid-morning, briefcase in hand, as if he had merely stopped by between business meetings. At 45, he was the kind of man who measured everything in terms of profit and loss, who saw people as assets to be managed rather than individuals to be loved. His presence in the house was rare and often unwelcome. But today Isabella needed a decision, one she couldn't bear to make alone, one that required the cold calculation that came so naturally to her husband. "She's becoming too attached," Isabella said coolly, not even looking up from her untouched cup, her voice carrying the kind of control that came from years of practice at hiding emotion. "It's unhealthy for Mateo, for our image, for everything we've built here." Charles raised an eyebrow, loosening his tie as he leaned against the doorframe with the casual indifference of someone who had never changed a diaper, never read a bedtime story, never comforted a crying child in the middle of the night. "Maria Elena?" he asked, though he knew the answer. He had seen the video, had fielded calls from business associates who found the whole thing either amusing or concerning, depending on their own relationship with their domestic staff. "She undermined me publicly," Isabella continued, her voice gaining strength as she built her case like a prosecutor presenting evidence. "And Matteo," her voice caught slightly before she regained control, before she pushed down the uncomfortable truth that her son loved someone else more than he loved her. He started calling her mama, like it's normal, like it's acceptable. "This isn't what we're paying her for. We're paying her to care for him, not to replace me." Charles, ever detached from the emotional complexities of family life, shrugged with the indifference of someone who saw people as easily replaceable assets, like cars or computers, or any other commodity that could be upgraded when it stopped serving its purpose. "If it's bad for appearances, just let her go," he said, with the casual brutality that had made him successful in business and terrible at relationships. "We can find someone else, someone who understands boundaries, someone who knows their place." That was all Isabella needed. Permission wrapped in the cold logic of business, validation for a decision she had already made but needed someone else to voice. Later that afternoon, Maria Elena was summoned to the study, a room she rarely entered unless delivering folded linens or serving coffee during Charles's infrequent visits. The study was Charles's domain: dark wood paneling, leather-bound books that had never been read, awards and photographs that celebrated his business achievements while ignoring his personal failures. She stepped inside, hands folded, face calm as always, though her stomach churned with quiet dread. She had seen this scene before, in other houses, with other families. She knew the signs, understood the language of dismissal that the wealthy used to distance themselves from uncomfortable truths. Isabella didn't waste time with pleasantries or explanations. She had rehearsed this conversation, stripped it of emotion, reduced it to a simple business transaction that could be completed quickly and efficiently. "We've decided," she began, her tone clicked and professional, each word precisely enunciated, as if she were dictating a memo to a secretary, "that your time with us will conclude at the end of this month. Of course, we'll provide a reference, but we feel it's best for everyone, especially for Matteo, that we part ways." The words hung in the air like a death sentence, like the end of a story that had never been allowed to reach its natural conclusion. Maria Elena didn't flinch, not visibly. She had survived worse than this: poverty that gnawed at your bones, loss that hollowed out your heart, heartbreak that would have broken lesser souls. She simply nodded, her voice a soft echo of acceptance that carried more dignity than Isabella's entire performance. "I understand, Signora." But from the hallway, a sound pierced the air that made both women freeze, a shriek of pure anguish, the kind of sound that comes from a heart breaking in real time, from innocence being shattered by adult cruelty, from a child's world collapsing without warning. No, 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 no. It was Matteo. He had been listening, his small ear pressed to the door. His young heart, too innocent to understand why the adults in his life were determined to destroy the one relationship that made him feel safe and loved and whole. He burst into the room like a small hurricane, his face red and streaked with tears, his eyes wide with the kind of panic that only children experience when their world suddenly makes no sense, when the people they trust most prove themselves capable of unthinkable cruelty. "You can't," he sobbed, throwing himself at Maria Elena's legs with desperate strength, clinging to her like she was the only solid thing in a world that had suddenly become liquid and unstable. "I want Mama Maria. I don't want her to go. Please don't make her leave." He clung to her with the fierce desperation of someone who understood, on some primal level, that he was about to lose the most important person in his small world, the person who had shaped his understanding of love and safety and what it meant to be cherished. Isabella moved to pull him away, her face flushed with a cocktail of embarrassment and frustration that had been building for years. "Matteo, stop this at once. You're making a scene." But the scene had already been made. From the kitchen entrance, the chef stood frozen, his hands dusted with flour, his eyes wide with the kind of shock that comes from witnessing injustice in real time. One of the maids appeared beside him, her eyes welling with tears that she didn't bother to hide. The gardener then stopped his work outside the window, his face pressed against the glass as he watched the drama unfold. The driver, who had been polishing the cars, stood in the doorway with his mouth open in disbelief. No one spoke, but the message was clear. They had all seen everything. They all knew what this was, and they all understood the injustice of it. In their silence was a judgment more powerful than any words, a condemnation that would follow Isabella for the rest of her life. Maria Elena gently knelt to meet Matteo's gaze, her hands cupping his tear-streaked cheeks with infinite tenderness, her own eyes shimmering with unshed tears that carried the weight of every goodbye she'd never been allowed to say, every child she'd loved and lost to circumstances beyond her control. "It's okay, mi niño," she said softly, her accent thickening with emotion, her voice steady, despite the storm raging in her heart. "You're going to be all right. I promise you that. You're strong, you're kind, you're perfect just as you are." "But I want you to stay," he whimpered, his voice breaking with the weight of loss he was too young to understand, too innocent to accept. "You're my mama. You're my real mama." The words hit Isabella like physical blows, each one a reminder of her own failures, her own inability to connect with the child she had brought into the world but never learned to love. She had given him life, but Maria Elena had given him everything else: comfort, security, unconditional love. The foundation upon which his entire sense of self was built. Maria Elena's heart cracked again, not for herself, but for him, for how the world would teach him far too soon that love didn't always win, that sometimes the people who gave you the most had the least say in staying, that power and money could destroy even the purest bonds. She rose slowly, smoothing her uniform with hands that trembled only slightly, her dignity intact even in defeat, her love undiminished even in dismissal. "I'll start packing my things," she said simply, her words carrying a grace that made Isabella's cruelty seem even more stark by comparison. Isabella gave a curt nod, her victory feeling hollow even as she achieved it. Charles had already left the room, his part in this family drama concluded with typical efficiency, his conscience untroubled by the destruction he had helped orchestrate. The boy clung to the hem of Maria Elena's skirt until she gently, lovingly unclasped his grip with the same tenderness she had shown him every day for 4 years. She kissed the top of his head, breathing in the scent of his hair one last time, memorizing the weight of his small body against hers, storing up these final moments like treasures she could carry with her into an uncertain future. And just like that, the woman who had filled the house with lullabies and unconditional love walked away from the only child who had ever called her mama and meant it with his whole heart. But this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. The boy clung to the hem of Maria Elena's skirt until she gently, lovingly unclasped his grip with the same tenderness she had shown him every day for 4 years. She kissed the top of his head, breathing in the scent of his hair one last time, memorizing the weight of his small body against hers, storing up these final moments like treasures she could carry with her into an uncertain future. And just like that, the woman who had filled the house with lullabies and unconditional love walked away from the only child who had ever called her mama and meant it with his whole heart. But this wasn't the end of the story. It was only the beginning. Chapter 6. The Viral Revolution. A week passed. The house had returned to its calculated order. Fresh orchids in the entryway, lemon-scented polish on the banisters, and not a toy out of place. But beneath the surface perfection, something had fundamentally changed. The staff moved differently, spoke in whispers, exchanged glances that carried the weight of shared knowledge about what they had witnessed. Maria Elena had begun packing her few belongings in silence. Each item a memory. Each memory a small goodbye. Her room, which had never been much more than a place to sleep, now felt like a sanctuary she was being forced to abandon. The photograph of Diego sat on her dresser, watching over her preparations, with eyes that seemed to understand the injustice of it all. No one spoke of Mateo's outburst or the look on his face when she said goodbye each night. The Castellanos family moved on. That was their specialty, their survival mechanism in a world where image mattered more than truth, where reputation was more valuable than relationships. But the outside world wasn't moving on. If anything, the story was gaining momentum with each passing hour. The video from the garden party had exploded across every social media platform, shared by millions, commented on by thousands, analyzed by experts and ordinary people alike. It had been picked up by news outlets, discussed on talk shows, dissected by child psychologists who spoke about the importance of attachment and the damage caused when those bonds are severed. Real Mama was trending worldwide. Hashtag Nanny Love had been shared over 50 million times. Hashtag Truth from Children had sparked a global conversation about who really raises the children of the wealthy, about the invisible women who pour their hearts into other people's families while their own sacrifices go unrecognized. Celebrities were weighing in. Oprah had shared the video with a comment about the power of authentic love. Ellen had invited Maria Elena to appear on her show. The Today Show wanted an exclusive interview. Publishers were calling with book deals. Documentary filmmakers were pitching projects. But Maria Elena remained in her small room, packing quietly, unaware that she had become the center of a global conversation about love, family, and what really matters in life. Isabella, meanwhile, was drowning in the attention. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, requests for interviews, invitations to defend herself on television. The comments on her social media accounts ranged from supportive to savage, with most falling into the latter category. How could you fire the woman who clearly loves your son more than you do? That little boy's heart is breaking, and you don't even care. Money can't buy what that nanny gave your family. You're going to regret this for the rest of your life. The criticism was relentless, brutal, and largely accurate. Isabella found herself defending decisions she wasn't sure she believed in, explaining actions that seemed increasingly indefensible with each passing day. A week passed. The house had returned to its calculated order, fresh orchids in the entryway, lemon-scented polish on the banisters, and not a toy out of place. But beneath the surface perfection, something had fundamentally changed. The staff moved differently, spoke in whispers, exchanged glances that carried the weight of shared knowledge about what they had witnessed. Maria Elena had begun packing her few belongings in silence, each item a memory, each memory a small goodbye. Her room, which had never been much more than a place to sleep, now felt like a sanctuary she was being forced to abandon. The photograph of Diego sat on her dresser, watching over her preparations with eyes that seemed to understand the injustice of it all. No one spoke of Mateo's outburst or the look on his face when she said goodbye each night. The Castellanos family moved on. That was their specialty, their survival mechanism in a world where image mattered more than truth, where reputation was more valuable than relationships. But the outside world wasn't moving on. If anything, the story was gaining momentum with each passing hour. The video from the garden party had exploded across every social media platform, shared by millions, commented on by thousands, analyzed by experts and ordinary people alike. It had been picked up by news outlets, discussed on talk shows, dissected by child psychologists who spoke about the importance of attachment and the damage caused when those bonds are severed. Real Mama was trending worldwide. Hashtag Nanny Love had been shared over 50 million times. Hashtag Truth from Children had sparked a global conversation about who really raises the children of the wealthy, about the invisible women who pour their hearts into other people's families while their own sacrifices go unrecognized. Celebrities were weighing in. Oprah had shared the video with a comment about the power of authentic love. Ellen had invited Maria Elena to appear on her show. The Today Show wanted an exclusive interview. Publishers were calling with book deals. Documentary filmmakers were pitching projects. But Maria Elena remained in her small room, packing quietly, unaware that she had become the center of a global conversation about love, family, and what really matters in life. Isabella, meanwhile, was drowning in the attention. Her phone buzzed constantly with calls from reporters, requests for interviews, invitations to defend herself on television. The comments on her social media accounts ranged from supportive to savage, with most falling into the latter category. How could you fire the woman who clearly loves your son more than you do? That little boy's heart is breaking and you don't even care. Money can't buy what that nanny gave your family. You're going to regret this for the rest of your life. The criticism was relentless, brutal, and largely accurate. Isabella found herself defending decisions she wasn't sure she believed in, explaining actions that seemed increasingly indefensible with each passing day. But it was too late to change course now. Pride, that most expensive of luxuries, wouldn't allow her to admit she had made a mistake. So she doubled down, hired a PR firm, and prepared to weather the storm with the same cold determination that had gotten her this far in life. Isabella, as always, redirected her energy into reputation management. Today's distraction was a charity event, one she hosted annually, not out of passion, but for profile. Not for purpose, but for the photographs that would appear in society magazines and help rehabilitate her image. The event's highlight was a guest speaker, Dr. Carmen Reyes, a rising star in pediatric medicine who had recently been featured in Forbes' 30 Under 30 list. Young, brilliant, and recently appointed as the head of children's services at the city's largest hospital, she had a presence that commanded attention the moment she stepped through the gates. At 32, Dr. Reyes carried herself with the confidence of someone who had earned every accolade, every opportunity, every moment of respect through sheer determination and brilliance. Her deep brown skin glowed in the afternoon light, her hair styled in an elegant twist that spoke of professionalism without sacrificing femininity, and her tailored suit carried both authority and grace. She had grown up in the foster care system, bounced from home to home, family to family, never staying anywhere long enough to feel truly safe or loved. But somewhere along the way, she had encountered people who believed in her potential, who saw past her circumstances to the brilliant mind and compassionate heart that lay beneath the defensive exterior. As she made her way through the gathering, nodding politely to hosts and donors who had no idea of the journey that had brought her to this moment, Dr. Reyes's eyes caught a figure standing near the kitchen archway, partially obscured, almost invisible, but somehow achingly familiar. Maria Elena, still in her Navy uniform, still quiet, still carrying trays like she hadn't shaped the very air around her with her love and sacrifice, like she hadn't become the most famous nanny in the world overnight. Dr. Reyes stopped mid-step, her breath catching in her throat as recognition dawned. She stared for a moment longer, disbelief giving way to certainty. Certainty giving way to something deeper, more profound. A gratitude so overwhelming, it threatened to bring her to her knees, right there in the middle of Isabella's perfectly manicured garden. She broke through the circle of guests and walked directly toward Maria Elena, who had just placed a plate of canapés on a serving table with the same careful attention to detail she brought to everything she did. Maria Elena, the voice was different, older, more confident, carrying the authority of someone who had fought for everything she had achieved. But Maria Elena would have recognized it anywhere. She turned, confused at first, then her eyes widened as recognition dawned like sunrise after the longest night. "Carmen?" she whispered, her voice barely audible over the garden party chatter, over the clinking of glasses and the murmur of conversations that suddenly seemed trivial compared to this moment of connection across time and circumstance. The two women met in an embrace that collapsed time, that bridged the gap between past and present, between the scared teenager Carmen had been and the accomplished doctor she had become. It was an embrace that spoke of love transcending circumstance, of bonds that couldn't be broken by distance or time or the cruel indifference of systems designed to keep people apart. "I can't believe it," Dr. Reyes murmured, her professional composure cracking to reveal the emotional young woman underneath. The girl who had once been so angry at the world that she pushed away everyone who tried to help. "I didn't know. I had no idea you were here." Maria Elena pulled back, her voice soft with wonder and pride that seemed to illuminate her entire being. "Look at you, mija. Look what you've become." Tears filled Dr. Reyes's eyes as she held Maria Elena's hands, hands that had once braided her hair when she was too depressed to care for herself, hands that had packed her lunches with little notes of encouragement, hands that had held her when the world seemed too cruel for a foster child to bear. "You were the first person who ever believed in me," Dr. Reyes said, her voice breaking with emotion that had been building for 15 years. Since the day she aged out of the system and lost touch with the one person who had made her feel like she mattered. "When I was just another angry kid in the system, when everyone else had given up, you never did. You used to bring me books, remember? You read with me every week, even when I didn't want to. You told me I was smart before anyone else did." Maria Elena smiled through her own tears, remembering the defiant teenager who had hidden her intelligence behind anger, who had pushed away every adult who tried to help, except for one nanny who refused to give up, who saw potential where others saw problems, who believed in possibilities when everyone else saw only limitations. "I always knew you were special, Carmen. I always knew you would change the world. I'm a doctor because of you," Dr. Reyes said, her voice rising slightly as she became aware of the crowd beginning to gather around them, phones appearing like flowers blooming in spring, cameras focusing on this unexpected reunion. "Everything I have, everything I am, you started it. You planted the seed when I was too broken to believe anything could grow." Around them, the chatter began to die down. Guests turned, noticing the emotional reunion unfolding before them. Sensing that they were witnessing something significant, something that would be remembered long after the canapés were forgotten and the champagne had lost its fizz. There in front of the same crowd that barely acknowledged Maria Elena's existence, a renowned physician, a woman who had been featured on magazine covers and interviewed on national television, who saved children's lives for a living, was openly, emotionally embracing the woman they called the Help. One guest leaned toward Isabella and whispered, "Who is she talking to?" Isabella's smile faltered as she watched the scene unfold, as she realized that her carefully planned event was being overshadowed by the very woman she had tried to erase from her life. "I thought she was just the nanny," she murmured, her voice uncertain for the first time in years. Dr. Reyes turned toward the crowd, still holding Maria Elena's hand, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had earned the right to speak truth to power, who had climbed from the bottom of society to its heights and never forgotten where she came from. "She's not just anything," she said, her words cutting through the garden party atmosphere like a surgeon's scalpel, precise and devastating in their accuracy. "She's the reason I'm here at all." And just like that, the story everyone thought they knew about Maria Elena shifted. No longer background, no longer silent, no longer invisible. In that moment, she stood radiant in the truth of what she had given, not just to one child, but to many. And for once, they all saw her. The clink of champagne glasses had long since faded. Now all eyes were on the impromptu stage formed at the head of the garden, where Dr. Carmen Reyes stood, her hands still gently resting on Maria Elena's shoulder. The scheduled keynote had been forgotten. This moment, unscripted and raw, demanded attention with the force of truth finally being spoken. "I stand before you today as a doctor, as someone who saves lives for a living," Dr. Reyes said, her voice ringing with conviction that came from the deepest places of the heart. "And I want you to know that Maria Elena saved mine first. She didn't do it with money or connections or influence. She did it with something far more powerful. She did it with love." Isabella's phone buzzed with notifications. The video was already going viral. Shared thousands of times in the minutes since Dr. Reyes had begun speaking, her carefully controlled world was cracking open in real time, exposed to the judgment of millions who would see this moment and understand exactly what kind of person she really was. "So the next time you see someone like Maria Elena," Dr. Reyes concluded, her voice carrying the weight of moral authority that could move mountains. "The next time you encounter someone who loves your children more than you do, who knows their fears and dreams better than you do, who shakes their character while you're busy shaping your image, remember this moment." She paused, letting the words sink in, letting the truth settle over the crowd like snow covering a landscape, transforming everything it touched. "Remember that true wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the lives we touch, the love we give, and the legacy we leave in the hearts of children." The applause started slowly, one person, then another, then a wave that swept across the garden like a tide of recognition. But it wasn't the polite, measured applause of high society. It was something deeper, more genuine, the kind of recognition that comes when truth cuts through pretense like sunlight through clouds. People were crying. Phones were recording. Social media was exploding with shares and comments and reactions from around the world. The hashtags were already forming. Hashtag Maria Elena deserves better. Hashtag real love wins. Hashtag Nanny appreciation. Even Charles, barely present until now, approached Isabella with furrowed brows and the kind of concern that only came when business interests were threatened. "Maybe we overreacted," he muttered, fidgeting with his tie as he watched the crowd's reaction. "All this attention, maybe we should reconsider. Maybe we should ask her to stay." But Maria Elena had already heard enough. She didn't raise her voice, didn't look angry, didn't seek revenge or vindication. She simply stood with the quiet power of someone who had nothing left to prove and everything to give. Someone who understood that dignity couldn't be taken away by others. It could only be surrendered. "I'm not staying," she said gently, her words carrying across the suddenly quiet garden with the force of absolute conviction. "Not where I'm only valued when the world is watching." Charles said nothing. Isabella's mouth opened, then closed again. For the first time in their privileged lives, it wasn't their house, their rules, their story. It was hers, and everyone was finally listening. The video of Dr. Reyes's speech would be viewed over 100 million times in the next 24 hours. It would be translated into dozens of languages, shared by celebrities and ordinary people alike, discussed on news programs and talk shows around the world. But more than that, it would start a conversation about the invisible women who raise other people's children, about the bonds that matter more than blood, about the difference between giving birth and being a mother. And at the center of it all was Maria Elena, who had never sought fame or recognition, who had simply loved a child with her whole heart and found herself at the center of a global movement that would change how the world thought about family, love, and what really matters in life. The day Maria Elena left the Castellanos estate, the skies were clear, as if even the weather understood that this was no resignation. It was a liberation, a quiet revolution wrapped in dignity and grace. The morning sun cast long shadows across the perfectly manicured grounds, illuminating a world that looked the same but felt fundamentally different. She didn't pack much, a single suitcase that had traveled with her from job to job, family to family, carrying the few possessions that mattered to someone who had learned that home wasn't a place, but a feeling. A few keepsakes, a rosary from her grandmother, a book of poetry worn soft from reading, and a folded drawing tucked carefully inside the pocket of her coat. The drawing was precious beyond measure. A stick figure child holding hands with a taller figure in a triangle dress with the words Mama Maria written in shaky crayon letters across the top. It was Mateo's masterpiece, created during one of their quiet afternoons together, when the house was still and they could pretend they were just a mother and son spending time together. She hadn't cried when she walked through the foyer one last time, hadn't shed a tear when she passed the marble staircase where Mateo had once called her mama in front of the world. Her dignity remained intact, her head held high, her heart full of love that couldn't be diminished by cruelty or ignorance. But when she reached the gate, the stillness broke. Footsteps pounded behind her, small, desperate, breathless. The sound of a child running, as if his life depended on it, as if he could somehow outrun the adult decisions that were tearing his world apart. Maria Elena, wait! She turned to see Mateo running down the path, his arms pumping, his cheeks flushed with exertion and tears. He had escaped from his mother's watchful eye, had slipped away from the nanny who was supposed to replace Maria Elena, had run with the desperate determination of someone who understood that this might be his last chance. His tiny hands gripped her coat as he crashed into her legs with the full force of his 5-year-old body, nearly knocking her off balance with the intensity of his need. "Don't go," he pleaded, his voice breaking with the weight of loss he was too young to understand, but old enough to feel in every fiber of his being. "Please don't leave me." Maria Elena knelt, cupping his face as the wind ruffled his dark hair. Her eyes shimmered with the ache of every goodbye she'd never been allowed to say, every child she'd loved and lost to circumstances beyond her control, every moment of joy that had been stolen by the cruelty of systems designed to keep people in their place. "You'll always be in my heart, mi niño," she whispered, her voice soft and full of promise, carrying the weight of love that would transcend distance and time. "But you belong to them now. Be brave, be kind, and remember what I taught you, especially when no one's looking." He nodded through his tears, trying to be brave for her even as his world crumbled around him, even as he felt the first sharp pain of understanding that love wasn't always enough to keep people together. She kissed his forehead, breathing in his scent one last time, that mixture of childhood innocence and unconditional trust that she would carry with her forever. Then she gently turned away, walking down the path with her head held high, dignity in every step, leaving behind not just a job, but a piece of her heart. The gates closed behind her, not with finality, but with freedom. For the first time in 4 years, Maria Elena was no longer bound by the rules and expectations of others. She was free to love without limits, to speak without fear, to be herself without apology. Behind her, Matteo stood at the gate, his small hands wrapped around the iron bars, watching the only mother he had ever really known disappear into a world that suddenly seemed vast and uncertain. Isabella appeared moments later, her face a mask of controlled fury as she pulled him away from the gate, away from the woman who had dared to love her son more than she did. But the damage was done. The truth had been spoken. The world had listened, and nothing would ever be the same again. 3 months later, a modest building opened on the corner of a quiet street in East Los Angeles, far from the glittering suburbs and gated estates where Maria Elena had spent so many years loving other people's children. The neighborhood was different here. Working-class families, immigrant communities, people who understood struggle and sacrifice in ways that the wealthy never could. The building itself was unremarkable from the outside. 2 stories of weathered brick, windows that had seen better days, a small parking lot that had been repaved with donated materials. But inside, magic was happening. The windows were painted with handprints in every shade of brown and beige and gold, a rainbow of humanity that spoke to the diversity of the children who had found refuge here. The front sign bore 5 simple words in bold blue letters: Diego's house, a place to heal. The name was deliberate, chosen to honor the son Maria Elena had lost, while celebrating the children she could still save. Diego's house wasn't just a daycare or an after-school program. It was a sanctuary for children who had been forgotten by the system, overlooked by society, dismissed as problems rather than recognized as possibilities. Inside, the air was filled with real laughter, not the practiced kind that echoed through mansion halls, but the genuine joy of children who had found safety after storm. There were crayon-streaked walls that told stories of creativity unleashed, reading nooks shaped like treehouses where imagination could soar, and rows of tiny shoes left near the entrance by children who finally had a place to call home. The funding had come from unexpected sources. The viral video had touched hearts around the world, inspiring donations from celebrities and ordinary people alike. Oprah had written a personal check. Ellen had featured the project on her show. A tech billionaire whose own nanny had shaped his childhood had quietly funded the entire first year of operations. But more than money, Diego's house had something that couldn't be purchased: love in abundance, hope without conditions, and a woman who understood that healing happened one hug at a time. Maria Elena stood in the middle of it all, a clipboard in one hand and a stuffed bear in the other. At 52, she had found her calling, her purpose, her reason for surviving everything that had come before. Her gray sweater was speckled with glitter from the morning's art project. Her hair was slightly mussed from a toddler's enthusiastic hug, and her face glowed with the kind of contentment that money couldn't buy. She didn't wear a uniform here. She wore love like a second skin, and it transformed everything it touched. The children responded to her with the same instinctive trust that Matteo had shown, recognizing in her someone who saw them not as problems to be managed, but as treasures to be cherished. The viral video had changed everything. Publishers wanted her to write a memoir about her experiences raising other people's children. Nonprofits offered her leadership positions with 6-figure salaries. City council members promised funding for larger centers, for expansion, for programs that could reach thousands of children. But she had started small, on purpose, because she knew what children really needed wasn't perfection, it was presence. They didn't need programs or policies or bureaucratic solutions. They needed someone who would show up day after day with open arms and an open heart. At the back of her office hung a simple frame. Inside it was a crayon drawing, wrinkled and torn at one corner. 2 stick figures holding hands under a sun, one labeled Matteo, the other Mama Maria. She'd hung it right above her desk so she'd see it every day. Not for validation, but for remembrance. Because Maria Elena hadn't just left a house behind, she'd built a home, one stitched from pain and transformed into purpose. And now every child who walked through her doors didn't just get a caretaker, they got someone who saw them, someone who stayed, someone who understood that love wasn't about blood or money or social standing. It was about showing up day after day with open arms and an open heart. Chapter 10, The Ripple Effect. The late afternoon sun bathed Diego's house in soft golden light, its windows glowing like lanterns against the approaching dusk. Each pane caught the movement of joy inside, small hands waving paintbrushes, giggles echoing off walls that had never known silence, shoelaces being tied by patient fingers that understood that some victories were measured in the smallest moments. Maria Elena moved through the rooms like a steady current, the heartbeat of a place that pulsed with life and hope. She crouched to listen as a little girl whispered a secret into her ear, smiled as a boy proudly showed her his first drawing of a house with a family inside, comforted a quiet child who still flinched at loud noises but was learning, slowly, to trust again. There was no applause here, no spotlight, no recognition from the outside world, just love unfolding in 1,000 unseen moments, just healing happening one hug at a time. She no longer wore the mask of restraint she had carried in the Castellanos mansion. Here, her laughter was unguarded, her presence complete. She was no longer a silent figure in the background of someone else's story. She had become the author of many stories, the guardian of many dreams, the mother to many hearts that had been broken before they learned to beat with hope. The impact of Diego's house extended far beyond its walls. The viral video had sparked a global conversation about the invisible women who raise other people's children, about the bonds that matter more than blood, about the difference between giving birth and being a mother. Nannies around the world had shared their own stories, creating a movement that demanded recognition, respect, and rights for domestic workers who had been invisible for too long. Laws were being proposed to protect their interests. Unions were being formed to advocate for their rights, and families were beginning to understand that the women who raised their children deserved more than just paychecks. They deserved dignity. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that danced with the evening breeze, the children gathered around Maria Elena in the main room. One nestled against her shoulder, another tugged gently at her sleeve, a third climbed into her lap with the confidence of someone who knew they were wanted. She read to them in her calm, melodic voice, one hand turning pages, the other resting protectively across a child's back. The story was about a little bird who had lost its way, but found a new flock, a new family, a new song to sing. When she finished, a small voice piped up from the circle. "Maria Elena, will you always be our mama?" She looked around at the faces surrounding her, some scarred by experiences no child should endure, others bright with the resilience that children possess in abundance, all of them beautiful in their imperfection, their humanity, their capacity to love despite everything they had lost. "Always," she said simply, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Because true motherhood, she had learned, was not measured by blood or birth certificates or legal documents. It was measured by the love that showed up when it mattered, by the sacrifice that asked for nothing in return, by the unwavering presence that said without words, "You matter, you are seen, you are loved." Epilogue, The Legacy. 1 year later, Maria Elena received an unexpected visitor at Diego's house. She was in the garden with the children, teaching them how to plant tomatoes, when she heard a familiar voice calling her name, "Mama Maria." She turned to see Matteo running toward her, taller now, his face more mature, but his eyes still holding that same spark of joy she remembered. Behind him walked a woman she barely recognized, Isabella, but different somehow, humbler, more human. The year had not been kind to the Castellanos family. The viral video had followed them everywhere, making them pariahs in their social circle, forcing them to confront truths they had spent years avoiding. Charles had filed for divorce, taking half their fortune and leaving Isabella to raise Mateo alone, something she had never actually done before. "I came to apologize," Isabella said, her voice barely above a whisper, "and to ask if you might consider coming back." Maria Elena looked at the woman who had once dismissed her so cruelly, who had tried to erase her from her son's life, who had valued image over love and status over truth. Then she looked at Mateo, who was watching the interaction with the wisdom of a child who had learned too young that adults could be cruel and love could be complicated. "I'm exactly where I belong," Maria Elena said gently, gesturing to the children who surrounded her, who looked up at her with the same trust and love that Mateo once had. "But you're welcome to visit anytime. Both of you." Isabella nodded, tears streaming down her face as she finally understood what she had lost, what she had thrown away in her pursuit of perfection. She had gained the whole world but lost her soul. And more importantly, she had lost the one person who could have taught her how to be a real mother. As they prepared to leave, Mateo hugged Maria Elena with the same fierce love he had always shown her. "I love you, Mama Maria," he whispered. "I always will. And I love you, mi niño," she whispered back, "forever and always." Outside, the world continued its relentless pace. Money changed hands, power shifted, social media feeds refreshed with new scandals and forgotten heroes. But inside Diego's house, time moved differently. Here, healing happened at the speed of trust. Love grew at the pace of patience. Hope bloomed in the soil of consistency and care. And Maria Elena, who had once been invisible in a mansion full of mirrors, now stood at the center of a universe where every child was seen, every story mattered, and every heart was given the chance to heal. The viral video that had started it all continued to circulate, shared by millions, commented on by thousands, a digital testament to the power of speaking truth in a world built on pretense. But the real impact wasn't measured in views or shares or likes. It was measured in the children who slept peacefully for the first time in months. In the teenagers who dared to dream of college, in the young adults who learned that their past didn't define their future. It was measured in the revolution that happened one heart at a time, one hug at a time, one I love you at a time. And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky above Diego's house, Maria Elena tucked the last child into bed, turned off the lights, and whispered the same prayer she had whispered every night for years. "Thank you for letting me love them. Thank you for letting me be their mama." Because in the end, that's all she had ever wanted. Not recognition, not wealth, not fame. Just the chance to love without limits, to heal without conditions, to mother without boundaries. And in a world that often forgot the value of such simple gifts, Maria Elena had built something extraordinary, a place where love was the only currency that mattered, where every child was rich beyond measure. And where the revolution of the heart continued, one day at a time. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the invisible heroes in your own life, don't just scroll past. Share it. Tag someone who needs to hear this message. Because somewhere, right now, there's a Maria Elena loving a child who isn't hers, shaping a future she may never see, changing the world one heart at a time. And maybe, just maybe, it's time we started seeing them. What will you do today to recognize the Maria Elenas in your world? Tell us in the comments below. Subscribe for more stories that matter. Hit that notification bell, because the revolution of love is just beginning, and you don't want to miss what happens next. Remember, True wealth isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in the lives we touch, the love we give, and the legacy we leave in the hearts of children. Share this story. Change a life. Start a revolution.